Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bedluck Gamer, and it's patch day. Who knew that in a TTRPG we'd be having day one patches? All joking aside, it's really common for TTRPGs to just have some patches that need to be done, or some errata that needs to be done. It's common in all forms of writing. Something gets passed, and things get tossed around a bit. Some stuff put in at the last moment. It's just something that will happen. So we're not really here necessarily for the player core errata, but we are going to be here for what the Dark Archives and Secrets of Magic are, because I know a lot of our spellcaster friends have had a few things change with the spells. So we're going to be going over each of these, though, just to see. We're not going to be going over, though, the core rulebook errata and the advanced player's guide errata, just because all they talk about is really the changes to alignment and how that works with champion stuff, more or less. So if you are curious about that, for sure, go ahead and check it out. But mostly it just talks about how edicts and anathema work and all that other kinds of stuff. So let's go ahead and get right into it with the player core errata. So some of the first, and I've actually already read this, so we can go through a lot of the chaff pretty easy here. So for Diomatic Display Druid Feet, there was an error when said any creatures are not affected if they can see you. The not was not supposed to be there. Obviously, it has to work if the creatures can see you. So easy enough. Yeah, this was one I pointed out in my fighter video. Aggressive block is not supposed to be a reaction. It's supposed to be a free action. So yeah, they just put that symbol in incorrectly. There were just some writing errors when it was talking about warden spells for, the ranger stuff. So the full intent for focus spells, if you're not aware at this point, is focus spells are whenever you refocus 1 point every 10 minutes up to your maximum of focus points, and as well, you have a number of focus points equal to the number of focus spells you know, up to a maximum of 3. So yeah. Other than that, nothing too serious there. In this page 215 part here in the first sentence of expert spellcasting feat, there was just some errors because now we have the combined spellcasting trait, more or less. So you don't need to have the appropriate magical tradition or whatever. We just have a singular magic trait. So that being the case, any association with appropriate magical tradition gets removed. The only time a specific tradition is necessary is what spells you have access to, more or less. So another pretty small one. Honestly, we're not to the juicy stuff quite yet, but we'll see as we get there. The page 235 here, which also needs an errata because it's not bolded like everything else. Was the fact that long jump implied that you needed to jump the full long jump distance. It is meant to be up to your leap distance rather than, or not your leap distance, your movement distance. So you don't have to jump your full length on long jump. A thing that I don't think anyone is really talking about. Oh, a price change here that I actually didn't notice. The Arbalist, which makes sense because that's the new martial crossbow, was too expensive. So it's now 8 gold pieces rather than 12 gold pieces, which is good because that should allow people to buy some armor with their Arbalist as well. So a pretty good change. Oh, this part I am very much upset about. So, all right. On pages 304, 307, and 309, the day spell description should read cloud a creature's mind and possibly stun it. The cowards! They should just let Daze make the enemy off guard. Daze is so terrible. It's even worse now than it used to be. Daze needs the off. Honestly, in my games, I think from now on, I'm just going to make Daze's standard, success condition or the enemy failure condition as making the enemy off guard. I think that's necessary for Daze's terrible heightening and poor scaling. It's just a bad cantrip. I don't know why anyone would take it, honestly. So yeah. They didn't change Daze, which is super unfortunate. I know a lot of people were looking forward to that. Grim Tendrils is no longer in the Divine Spell list. It wasn't before. This was erroneously put in this book. So yeah, Tendrils was not intended to be in the Divine Spells. There are just a couple typos in Acid Grip, which is the spell should be one creature, not an area of one creature, and as well, the spell doesn't have a duration or an intended duration. So the duration 1 minute was also erroneous. It's based on how long the enemy is suffering from the persistent damage. So that being the case, just a couple errors. I'm sure most people would have figured it out anyway. But I guess if you had a bunch of tiny creatures stacked up in a single square, you can't grip them all at the same time, which is a little sad. But overall, I think this is pretty obvious stuff. All right, so the Avatar spell, which is a massive spell, which I didn't even look into every part of it, needed some extra text just to help people who are newer to the game on how deadly works. So now when their weapons proc their deadly, you see the damage here. So overall, not a big thing. It was just the deadly weapons needed a little bit of extra text. Nothing major. Here's one I see mentioned or people mentioned before. Both Bane and Bless need to have the aura trait, so now they do. So all good for that. Here's also an interesting one. Cleanse Affliction was not supposed to have 2 casting times, which I think is obvious. So you remove the 1 minute one, which makes sense. It's supposed to be used in combat after all. And in addition to this, all the essentially cleansing abilities that they added, which was Clear Mind, Sound Body, Sure Footing, and uh, Cleanse Affliction, they've made them better so that they all now get rid of the slow condition. So no matter what cleansing spell you have on you, you can get rid of slow, which I think a lot of people will appreciate. So that being the case, now all of them at their 4th rank heightened version will remove the slow condition in addition to what it did before. So an interesting change, and honestly, one I generally agree with. Slow just doesn't feel fun. So if you have a character who's picked up one of these conditions, it's one of the few things that they can really work with regularly. So I'm actually overall happy for this. This is one I noticed, but I didn't even think about it at the time. The control water spell doesn't mention a duration for when you like lower a water. It now lasts for an hour. So it's no longer a permanent reduction. It now just lasts for an hour. This doesn't change anything else about how it works. It was something I noticed, but I didn't even think about it because honestly, there's so much going on. But yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. Now control water doesn't, just permanently reduce water every time you cast the spell, which would be pretty terrifying. Here's a series of changes of things I pointed out in my videos. So many of the spells that no longer require a spell attack roll, such as Enfeeble or Frostbite, don't have the attack trait anymore, which is pretty good. So overall, yeah, they don't have the attack trait anymore, which means that Magus doesn't have, as many spells as it used to. And I saw a lot of people. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about that for just a moment here. No, actually, let's wait till we get to the Magus part. I'll talk about that when we get to the Magus part in a little bit. But for now, just know that any spells that don't require attack roll here do not have the attack trait. Obviously, there's still the question of what about, spiritual weapon or spiritual guardian, but those haven't been mentioned here actually at all. Also, another really cool change here, Figment now just has the subtle trait, which I think is honestly necessary. I didn't even think about it when it came up, but yeah, Figment now has the subtle trait, which I think is super cool. Makes Figment actually much more interesting. So all for that change. Random bolding here. I don't know if they want these bolded or not. Like, I don't know who worked on this page, but the Speak with Plants was printed with too many actions. It's supposed to be 2 actions. So yeah, that's something I pointed out as well. Very interesting. With the addition of reposition in the game, they forgot to make it something you can use with telekinetic maneuver. So now telekinetic maneuver can also reposition people, which I don't know why you would do that most of the time, but you can do it. The hard part about telekinetic maneuver is like, I guess, yeah, no, I don't know. I Because it's supposed to keep you within reach. Is it within of the spell? That doesn't make sense. Does it just allow you to rotate in a square? But couldn't shove technically do the same thing? So I don't know. It's something that that I'm very curious about the intent with telekinetic maneuver here. But yeah, it does make sense that it's added. I just don't know how it's supposed to work. Apparently, the Tempest Surge Druid focus spell was a little too strong when the enemy crit failed, so now it no longer does any persistent damage in the entire spell description. So yeah, no more persistent electricity damage with Tempest Surge. A little sad. I don't even remember it all too clearly. I know I looked at it, but I don't think it relatively changed. So I guess a bit of a nerf to Tempest Surge. I don't know if that's super relevant or not, but it is here. On the page 403 section here, when they're talking about spell attack rolls, they're not talking about like your attribute modifier, because this is no longer applied since we have a unified spell attack proficiency across traditions. So it was just the thing of like what your modifier is doesn't kind of make sense anymore. So yeah, I completely agree. Oh, the big change. We're here. Okay. So the text for the wounded condition was changed because that's what it was before, but apparently that was not Paizo's intent. So in the recovery check section and undertaking damage, no longer do you add your wounded condition again if you fail a recovery check. It's now just only you add your wound condition when you gain the dying condition. So it was pretty much being played as intended before. This is a very interesting one, honestly, because I know a lot of people were upset about this. They said the game's way more lethal now. Nonat's video of like it's the most deadly game in TTRPG, which is not true, not even close. But now, and I know the D&D guy, I can't remember his name, the one who started doing a lot of Pathfinder content. He was super hyped that Pathfinder is a lot more deadly. So I guess a lot of people here are going to be like upset one way or the other with this change. Some people are going to be happy because it's changed. Some people are going to be upset because now the game is not as lethal as people wanted to. Can't win them all, I suppose. I'm actually very surprised. Honestly, in my own like games, this change really didn't change much. My players rarely ever went down more than once in a fight. So it was something that like could happen, sure, and did make the game potentially more lethal. I was generally fine with it, but at the same time, like I don't know. A lot of people kind of had a big hoopla about this. So yeah, no, the game was being played as intended before. Now no longer on your second down in a combat are you going to die if you fail one death saving throw, which I guess overall is good for the people who don't want to die and bad for the people who do want to die. I don't know. But yeah, very, very interesting. Oh, here's a funny interaction that I don't even think most people thought about. It was implied before that a tiny creature could move through your space, but you could not move through their space based on how the rules were written. So now tiny creatures no longer impede movement. So yeah, tiny creatures no longer impede movement, and you can end your turn in their square, which I think everyone was doing before. But it's funny that they didn't have it like. It's funny that it could be implied, I guess, that tiny creatures could prevent you from moving into their square. So that's super super funny. All right, now we're getting into the GM core stuff. This is probably not stuff for most players, honestly, but for the GMs out there, this could be interesting. So the fortification rune is getting a slight change to make it, I think, make a little bit more sense. Rather than saying strength required to reduce its penalties by 2, with strength modifier required to reduce its penalties by 1. So I guess the fortification rune was a little too strong, I suppose. I never really thought this way, but so yeah, there's that with the fortification rune. Oh, here's so the electric eel skirls activation required a spell attack modifier, but the thunderstrike spell it's essentially using doesn't use an attack spell. So now it just replaces the spell attack modifier with DC 29, which makes a ton of sense. So there's something about poisons, about everyone being upset that poisons got generally nerfed, and I don't think this relates to that. There's been a lot this morning when I woke up. But so throughout all poisons, replace all instances of interact with the activation line manipulate, which I don't know does anything. They equivalently mean the same thing in the system, but it's interesting that it's about poison specifically. Similar with penetration ammunition, replace interact with manipulate. So yeah, there's just wording. I don't know if this changed really much of anything, but I guess it does. So I guess technically, okay, no, actually, technically, manipulate can be used without a free hand. I think interact does need a free hand typically. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, a very strange change in my opinion. They added an erroneous line in spell scrolls entry with a frequency. There's no frequency to spell scrolls. They're a one and done. So yeah, you can't overcharge spell scrolls. I think this is also super funny. The skeleton key was not properly changed for the remaster. It, I think, probably used knock. Now it uses breach or what? No. Oh, maybe they were going to change knock to breach and then they decided not to. So replace the keycast breach with the keycast knock. Interesting, interesting. That must have been a change they decided not to go with breach rather than knock, which I understand. Knock makes more sense. But yeah, so very interesting. We can see a little bit of what the designers were intending here with the skeleton key changes. The flare bolt gift activation. Oh, gift activation requires a spell attack roll with your relic, so it should have the attack trait. So now it has the attack trait. Makes ton of sense. The grappling. Oh, these must be for the. These must be for the gifts for like artifact seeds. That makes sense. Also with grappling bind also requires an attack roll, so it should have the attack trait. Makes a lot of sense. So adding attack traits here. All right, we're about to get into the Dark Archive errata, but now obviously, I got to, since I got you all hostage. I know many of you are here to see what changed with Psychic. If you're enjoying this content, I'm covering all things Pathfinder and news that comes out and all this kind of fun stuff. So, if you want a chance to see more content like this video and subscribe, as this channel has been pumping out more content than anyone else when it comes to the remaster and probably Pathfinder in general. So, if you want to be up to date with things as they come out, you're gonna want to subscribe. Okay, let's go ahead with the Dark Archive here. All right, so right off the bat, they talk about the changes to the cantrips, as many of the cantrips that were changed are important. Now, they say you can continue to use the cantrips in the core rulebook, allowing the psychic to operate as currently written, though notes that errata to bring those spells in line with other remastered cantrips. So they have changes to cantrips, and they also have some other things as well. Now, if you wish to use the remaster version of cantrips rather in the player core rather than the core rulebook, they have rules for that. So now, oscillating wave uses frostbite and ignition instead of ray of frost and produce flame for their side cantrips. And now they do have different abilities and amps. So for frostbite here, you can see that the range of frostbite increases to 120 feet, and you get an amp for frostbite, which is increasing the damage to 3d4 cold damage, and you also gain temp HP equal to half the damage the target takes after applying resistances and the like. You lose these temp HP after a minute, which is, I guess, pretty cool. And then as it heightens, it increases its damage by 2d4 per heighten rather than 1, which the spell normally does, and the weakness on critical failure increases by 1. So overall, pretty cool for Frostbite. I like this change, honestly. I think it sounds very interesting. We can look at Ignition here. This is a big one I know a lot of people have been interested in. So you can drastically increase the heat against targets at a distance. When using the range attack version, increase its range increment to 60 feet. And when using its melee attack, you can increase the range by 5 feet, essentially making the ignition cantrip have reach. And this is pre-amp, which is pretty cool. I think that's awesome. Now, the amp allows you to do increased damage, so that the damage changes to a D10 plus 1 fire splash damage. And when using as a melee weapon, it it goes to it changes from D10s to D12s, and you're not harmed by the splash damage from this from using it in melee. So overall, it allows the ignition cantrip to do more damage, which honestly is really cool. D12s on the melee, and it's already a reach, kind of sick, and splash. That's really cool. Now, as you heighten it, instead of using ignition's normal heightened entry, the initial damage increases to, you know, D10s or D12s for melee, and the splash damage increases by 1. the persistent fire damage on critical hits increases by a d4. So overall, I think this is going to be a really good change. I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in this for the psychic. Now let's talk about Tangible Dream, because this is another one I know a lot of people were also very interested in. One of my co-players, because I'm playing in the game for Kingmaker, is Tangible Dream, so this is actually going to affect him. So now they gain Figment rather than Dancing Lights, which I think is super cool. Figment, I think, is a much more interesting cantrip overall now, especially with the subtle trait. And uh, they're saying, well, there are some minor changes to Shield cantrip. It activates more or less and can be used as intended without any major changes. So the only change we're going to see here is for Figment. Now, Figment increases its range to 60 feet, and when you sustain the spell, you can move the apparent sound or vision up to 15 feet. You can then attempt to create a diversion as usual. Those creatures who disbelieve the illusion aren't affected by this diversion. Your Figment also gains the following amp. So actually, let's take a look at this first. So this is very, very interesting. The fact that you can move it now as you sustain it is really cool, and the increased range. I think this is awesome, especially since Figment is subtle now. So this is actually a very powerful cantrip. And in addition, when you amp it, you create a more distracting illusion. Choose an unoccupied space within the spell's range. The illusion in that square provides flanking for a single melee attack before the beginning of your next turn. If you sustain the spell, the details of the illusion change and shift to keep your enemies unsettled. The flanking illusion's duration extends until the beginning of your next turn, and you can move it to any unoccupied space in the spell's range. The flanking illusion can't provide its benefit against any creature who disbelieve the Figment. So now Figment can be used to even flank, which is really cool. In addition to creating a diversion, making this a really solid, like, support cantrip to use for your team. Now you have your range users who can use it, in addition to your melee users, which I think is very, very good. Now, there's going to be the damage changes here, which a lot of people I know are going to be upset about now, most of the time. So let's just look at it one by one here. So now, Dancing Blade cantrip has changed from 2d6 plus casting modifier to 3d6. For the Forbidden Thought changed from 1d6 mental plus spellcasting modifier to 2d6 mental damage. The Imaginary Weapon changes to 1d8 plus spellcasting modifier to 2d8 bludgeoning or slashing of your choice. And the Astral Rain cantrip here is no longer 2d4 plus spellcasting modifier, and instead is replaced with 4d4 bludgeoning damage or piercing damage, your choice. And Phase Bolt cantrip getting its damage change from 1d4 piercing damage plus spellcasting modifier to 3d4 piercing damage. I'm actually very curious about the ones. I guess the ones that don't do additional stuff just get another die. So I think that's actually not too bad, because 1d4 piercing plus spellcasting modifier was minimum 5 damage. And technically this new one is minimum 3 damage, but the average is closer to 6 damage, and the average for the other one was closer to 6 damage as well. So that being the case, I think the one that got 2 dice, overall it's more or less the same, with technically a higher high, but a lower low, though it's not as, frequent. So overall, I'm not here to discuss the damage changes to cantrips. That's a whole nother discussion. I'm just here to talk about what has changed here in the errata. Overall, I'm pretty optimistic. A lot of this is really, really cool. But we're coming up to the big one, Secrets of Magic. I know this one's been very hotly debated because both Magus and the Summoner kind of got some of their ish messed around with the remaster. So let's look at what has changed here. So now the big obvious change is with the removal of spell skills. The Arcane Cascade action has been changed to accommodate. Now it does force damage unless the spell does a damage type, and then if it does damage, the damage from Arcane Cascade changes to the damage of the spell or one of the damages if the spell does multiple types. Honestly, this is a very obvious change. It's something that, though, I am a little bit upset about, because it I mean, force damage works most situations, so I guess it shouldn't be a thing. But I did like the fact that transmutation let your weapon just do extra damage of its type. I thought that was very interesting, like thematically speaking. But now everything just does additional force damage, which I guess makes a ton of sense. And now you can choose whatever damage your spell does if it does multiple types of damage. So yeah, not too bad. Now, here's an interesting one. In the feat, they mentioned that you can use heroism, which is not on the arcane spell list and is removed from this more flexible version of Arcane Cascade. So now Arcane Cascade allows you to, once per turn, your most recent action was to cast a spell from a spell slot or make a spell strike with a spell slot. Your spell slot, your magic has a powerful after effect, briefly granting you a certain spell. When you use this feat, you can choose three of False Vitality, Fire Shield, Fleet Step, Flicker, Invisibility, Mountain Resilience, and See the Unseen. You use your Arcane Cascade. You use Arcane Cascade and are subject to an additional After Effects spell of your choice from the three you've selected. This so now, oh, that's very interesting. So now you pick three of these, and when you use Arcane Cascade, you get one of these whenever you use it. This After Effects spell's duration lasts until the end of your next turn, or its normal duration, whichever is shorter. Using Arcane Cascade again ends any existing spell you gained from Arcane Shroud. Very, very interesting. So I would have to look at it. Actually, let's talk about Magus here for a moment, shall we? So before, everyone kept saying, "Oh, but Magus has tons of attack spells, so removing a few isn't a big thing." Magus before had access to 24 attack spells, which might sound like a lot, right? Might sound like a fair amount. But that was spread across all their spell levels, and most of them were first and cantrip level spells, which kind of feels bad. So, with the removal of many of the attack cantrips and spells in the game, this is dropped to, I think, around 15 spells, and that's spread across all their spell levels. That's not a ton of choice, and even less choices in their attack cantrips, which honestly was one of the, I think, better ways to use your spell strike in most cases. Using a spell slot was always such a big risk, but people are like, oh, they have plenty, they were fine. No, they really didn't. In fact, I pulled up over here the list of spells, right? Acid Arrow has been removed for Acid Grip. Acid Splash has been changed to now I can't remember, Acid Burst, I think, and it now no longer has the attack trip. Admonishing Ray, I mean, who would use this with Spell Strike, honestly? Like, the whole point of it was non-lethal and did damage, so that's kind of worthless. Biting Words isn't on the spell list. Briny Bolts is still available, so that you got that one. Chilling Darkness isn't even on the spell list. Chromatic Ray was just removed, so that's gone. Clownish Curse, I mean, again, who is using Clownish Curse on as a spell strike feature, and this is a 4th level spell. Daydream's Curse here, again, who was doing this at all, another 4th level spell. Disintegrate, this one's still in the game, this one still works, so spell strike works perfectly fine with this one. This one is Dive and Breach. This is actually a new spell, and its purpose isn't even really good for the use. I know you can't see it, but there you go. Not really used for spell striking. Divine Lance is on your list. Gouging Claw still works, I think, just fine. So Gouging Claw is still good, and I think actually got a buff. Horizon Thunder Sphere, I don't think this one works obviously very well, but it's still there, so it still works. Hydraulic Push, I think, is still an attack spell, so I think that one still works. Magnetic Acceleration here still works, and I think works generally fine. That was on the arcane spell lists. That was on the arcane spell lists. Here, Needle Darts. Needle Darts is terrible with it because the biggest point of Needle Darts is it allows you to strike. I mean, like, I guess it's good if technically you're using it to do a certain, like, elemental or material damage, sure. But I do believe you actually need to be holding. Let's see, needles and parts. Yeah, it has to be a piece of metal in your possession. So you couldn't use this with two-handed attacks technically, unless possession means in your pocket, which I guess makes it work. You know, I'll give the benefit of the doubt. I'll say it works for everyone. Phase Bolt here works just well, and I think we just looked at it. It does now more damage, so good. Polar Ray has been removed for Arctic Rift. Produce Flame no longer does it. Raven Filament no longer does it. Ray of Frost no longer does it because they've all been changed to spells that now use saves. Sage's Curse, another one. I don't know who would have used this one. Scorching Ray has been removed, and I think it's still a spell attack roll, but again, this one's major features allowed you to attack multiple targets, which this one just was a terrible spell for it anyway. Non-arcane list. Shocking Grasp has been removed. Now it's Thunder Strike, which is a save-based spell. Slashing Gusts. I guess you could use this one. This one's fine, I suppose. Tanglefoot, I mean, who was using this one anyway? I think Tanglefoot even got removed. Telekinetic Maneuver, this one's a very strange one, but I guess you could technically use it. And Telekinetic Projectile, which I think is still relatively the same. So, as you can see from that list that I mentioned there, it's either most of the spells, who cares? They didn't do anything really crazy anyway, or they've just been removed. So yeah, Magus not getting a spell strike change here is actually very devastating. I think definitely Magus needs a change to Spell Strike. But let's continue on, shall we? So there's been changes to the islands, but not to Fae, which is crazy. So now for Angel Island, it does holy damage rather than good damage. That's all this text is written here for, is just saying that similarly with Demonic Strike, it now does unholy damage rather than evil damage. They also do an extra spirit damage to unholy creatures. Yeah, so I mean this. I mean, it's not a huge change for sure, but it was one that needed to happen. So I'm glad it's here. But there's no Fey Eidolon. Fey Eidolon just got screwed. Now, James, friend of the channel, did mention that they should just make it illusions and mental spells, which I honestly agree. So that's probably how I'm gonna run it, moving forward. But let's see here. Gale Blast spell replaced damage. So this one, there's some changes to some of the spells that were here that just damage changes. So now it's no longer bludgeoning damage equal to your spellcasting modifier. It's now a D6 bludgeoning damage. And Hunting Him no longer your spellcasting modifier. It now does a D8. Yeah, let me raise it up here. Sonic damage. Also in the spell's heighten, replace D6 with D8. So now it increases by D8s. Scatter Scree, a spell I thoroughly enjoy, now no longer does a D4 plus spellcasting modifier. It does a D4 bludgeoning damage. And Spout no longer does a D4 plus spellcasting modifier. It does 2d4 bludgeoning damage in addition given to the spell. In addition, they're giving the spell a little oomph. Add the following sentence to the description. A creature that critically fails its save is disoriented by the explosion, becoming off guard until the end of your next turn, which is actually kind of cool. So yeah, today I was going to make a video on my general thoughts and opinions of the remaster, and I'll probably do that at some point, maybe next week. I still am intending to do the focus spell changes and the ancestry changes, especially because Archive and Nethys is moving their stuff more towards the end of the month rather than doing their release today. So I'm still going to be doing those two videos for people who are curious. But overall, the errata did fix some things and it did tune a little bit, but there needs to be more. There's still so many things that just aren't really making sense. I think Magus really needs some changes. It's so action heavy, and with most combats lasting 3 to 5 rounds, it can feel like your first round feels a lot like a setup round. So Magus technically just gets less rounds, it feels like, than other classes do with just their massive action load. So there's that. There's also the attack spell thing that I mentioned here, which I'm sure people are going to argue with me. And you know what? Fine, you can argue with me, but I think that Magus needs to get just versatile spell strike just automatically put in. There's just not a lot of options. Magus just has so few options, and that doesn't feel good. I don't care who you are. If your class loses a ton of options, that always feels bad, and I feel that Magus needs something in addition. The Psychic changes I'm actually super hyped for. I think Psychic definitely is going to feel really good actually with the new spells. In addition, also getting Figment rather than Dancing Lights, I think is just really, really cool. So I'm actually super hyped with everything they did with the Dark Archive stuff here. And, other than that, a lot of these changes were just changes that were obvious. I'm disappointed in the Days spell not getting changed. That's just tragic, honestly. Days is god awful. So, yeah, these are all the changes. Hopefully, this video was instructive or, you found this interesting. We went through it all together. I'm sure I'm going to get tons of comments about how my ideas are bad or about a bunch of people agreeing with me. That's just how it rolls. Uh, Regardless, I'm here to present it to you. This information is so we can discuss about it. Hey, and you can discuss it with me in the Discord linked in the description. Actually, also in the description, I'm going to be posting a link to this FAQ so that everyone can come and see it. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your remaster. Leave all the drama to me, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.